People love ranking stuff. So do I. And it's October. That means it's Halloween season. What better to do for Halloween than to watch an entire franchise so you can rank it and argue with people about it online? I say that with no judgment. I have done the same thing, and I'm sure I will argue with people online about many more movie things. It's just part of the fun. So for the Halloween season, I will go over some well-known horror franchises and recommend which ones I think are best to watch front to back. To cover these franchises, I will be doing a little generalizing to put them in some tonal buckets, but I will try to qualify the generalizing when it's necessary. Some franchises may fit under multiple umbrellas, but they can only go under one for the purposes of this video, so I will put them under what seems most applicable. And there are many franchises which aren't on the list. If one is not on the list, that probably just means I don't know enough about it to talk about it. Feel free to comment more down below, whatever you think may be the best to watch start to finish. And I will give my final 5 recommendations at the end based on a couple of different, potential criteria and motives for watching an entire series. Let's go right ahead. Let's start with slashers, maybe the most identifiable, the first kind that comes to mind. In this bucket, you've got franchises like Halloween, Friday the 13th, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I Know What You Did Last Summer. I'll group these together, like obviously they're not the exact same movies, but, generally we'll say they fit what might immediately come to mind as the slasher movie. A big guy coming after you, killing teenagers who are having sex. Again, not every single movie, but by and large. And these movies are largely pretty serious. They are usually relied upon for some interesting kills, some creativity here and there, maybe some cheap nudity, things like that. For Halloween, you could easily just check out the first one, or maybe Halloween 3 for something a little different in the series. Friday the 13th, Part 2 might be the best example. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, of course, the first one is a classic, but you could also look at number 2 for a very different tonal look at the series. Certainly an exception to the serious nature of a lot of these movies. For I Know What You Did Last Summer, honestly, just watch the first one and you can probably skip the rest, unless you find you really enjoy those specific people. For Nightmare on Elm Street, this is a little bit different. It is still the same general idea of, slasher, but the exception, I think, is the dream world type of thing that the film has going on. A lot of kills take place in dreams and thus have different rules than these other franchises are consigned to in the real world. There's a lot of creativity. While the franchise starts off fairly serious, it does go a little more over the top and one-linery along the way. And there truly is a lot of creativity through these movies. They offer familiar but unique riffs on the franchise's main idea along the way. And this is one of my favorites that will be featured in this video. Scream is perhaps the most consistent series. This notably has some almost meta, self-referential ideas, some deconstruction of the slasher genre, but still managing to create its own unique and highly respected variant of the slasher. This may be the most consistent series in this video. And while Scream 1 is the highlight, I don't hear a lot of people, decrying any of the movies as particularly poor. So if you watch this entire series, I think you'll probably have a nice, relatively even ride throughout it. Next, we'll go with supernatural, but not ghosts. First, we'll do Hellraiser. This series concerns events surrounding a mysterious puzzle box, which, when opened, will summon the Cenobites, who will torture you and maybe also make you feel unimaginable pleasure, too. It is a fairly extensive series, although many of the sequels kind of devolve into basically just existing to maintain rights. Largely, it seems the first 2 are well-liked, and especially the first one, which I would certainly recommend. The remake as well. Even though I was not particularly a fan of it, a lot of people do like it. So you could also look at that for a more modern interpretation of it. But these movies are fairly goopy and some certainly different ideas than you might find in the other ones, even though there are other franchises which are certainly more grotesque. Then we've got The Omen. This is about the son of the devil being incarnated and born on Earth, and shenanigans ensue. The first one is well worth a watch, and there are a few sequels which are not very well regarded, but the third one does feature young Sam Neill, which is kind of a weird spot for him to show up, honestly. He had a strange early career, but certainly recommend the first one. Then we've got some sci-fi franchises. Most notably Alien. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with the Alien movies, as well known for, of course, the space setting, the xenomorphs being a fantastic monster, It's even got David Fincher's debut in Alien 3. And while there are a couple of rough entries in my estimation, there is a nice amount of variety. Not all of them are straight up horror. There is some, sci-fi, whatever the heck Prometheus is, some more action-oriented movies like Aliens. But this is another one of the higher quality franchises with a couple of the best movies that will be included with the franchises in this video. Next, Phantasm. This is centered around a supernatural mortician who reanimates the dead in order to take over the world. Phantasm 1 is among my favorites of movies in this video. It's got a fantastic villain performance, really, and a uniquely unsettling atmosphere, I think. I would recommend giving the first one a shot for sure. Next, Godzilla. This, of course, could go under the monsters section, but, we'll give sci-fi a third one. Make the categories a little more even, Godzilla, of course, is a classic. You understand the general deal. Giant monster, kaiju type of deal. A long history, starting in the 50s in Japan, of course, and continuing even to now. Of course, last year, Godzilla -1. In the series' long history, there have been quite a number of different styles, tones, some animated movies, some stop motion stuff. You could really throw a dart and still find something interesting. But I would recommend starting with the original Godzilla. Watch Godzilla -1, the most recent one for the bookends. And then you could throw in something like Godzilla versus Destroyer for another well-regarded movie somewhere in the middle. Next, we'll talk about some so bad they're good franchises. Quality is subjective, of course, but these franchises are not exactly known for it. They are still often enjoyed by people, despite perceived shortcomings. Perhaps, again, because they're just fun to laugh at rather than laugh along with. First, we'll touch on Leprechaun. Lubden is a violent leprechaun who will do whatever is necessary to retrieve his stolen gold. This is actually my favorite franchise in this whole video. I had a lot of fun watching these movies. I do generally prefer watching, movies I think are good. But despite that, it's just a lot of entertainment value for me in this series. Warwick Davis is fantastic. He brings it every movie. He's always the best part, no matter what else is going on around him, no matter how capable the rest of the production seems to be. So I recommend this one a lot. The first one even features Jennifer Aniston in her first role, which is very funny to me. Do not watch Leprechaun Origins. Just skip that one if you manage to get that far. Next, Puppet Master. This series features some anthropomorphic puppets who were animated by an Egyptian spell. And these puppets each have, unique abilities and personalities. So it's not just like faceless, mannequins or something like that. Like they are distinct characters in and of themselves. I don't love this series really, but there is some amount of charm to it. It's just kind of interesting, I suppose, at the very least, to see like these very small puppets still manage to hold their own and defeat a bunch of humans who, by all rights, should be much stronger and bigger than them. Next, Evil Bong. And next, we'll cover some monster movies. First, I'll talk about the Wreck series briefly. This is a series of pretty intense Spanish zombie outbreak movies. The first two are found footage, the third and fourth are not. The first two, coincidentally, are worth watching. The third and fourth, maybe not so much. And specifically, I think the first one has some of the best found footage in any film that's been made. Some really wonderful craft going into making some of those long takes and some of that filmmaking happen. It's a very admirable movie, one of the best on this list. And the second one is worth a watch, even though I'm not a huge fan of it. And I didn't hate watching the rest of the series either. So, this could be a candidate, even if it is a shorter series. Frankenstein. Everyone knows Frankenstein, of course. Frankenstein's monster, if you want to be technical about it. This is a series of Hammer films that I'm referring to from 1957 to 1970, featuring Peter Cushing as the titular Victor Frankenstein. And he, of course, is fantastic, as he should be. These films are more on the theatrical side, horror, less intense, perhaps lighter Halloween fare, but that does not mean they're not worth watching. In a similar vein, Dracula, also Hammer films, also Peter Cushing, actually, but more notably, in this case, is the great Christopher Lee. Again, basically the same thing as Frankenstein, same era, nice light viewing, still fun to watch, like some adventurous monster movies from that era. Certainly the earliest franchises that I'm talking about on this list, besides Godzilla, I guess. And then the Dead series, we'll say. George Romero's zombie series. Starting with Night of the Living Dead, George Romero created the modern zombie archetype, and of course made several more afterwards. I believe 6, if I remember right. There are more Blank of the Dead movies that have come out that were not made by George Romero, including some remakes of Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead, and then Zack Snyder making his other entry, etc., etc. But George Romero's are the originals and classics. Many people say Night of the Living Dead is the best. Some will advocate for Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, you know. If you've got multiple good candidates for best film in a franchise, then, you know the franchise is on good footing. This one is certainly worth checking out multiple entries of. And also worth noting, you don't have to watch these in chronological order. So if one of them seems to catch your fancy more than the others, there's not a problem. These are not sequels to each other or anything. You can just pick one up. Next, cover some broad, modern supernatural franchises. One personal favorite of mine is House LLC. This is a haunted house series focusing on this one location's history through several films and several people. The first one is a favorite horror movie of mine. I've seen it a few times. I loved it. I still love it. I don't know why I used past tense. It is one of the, I think, scarier horror movies I've seen. There's also found footage. The first one uses the format fairly well. I have some attachment to 2. Some people like 4 a little bit. This is, again, a shorter series, so it could be easier to get through. I think there are parts of all 4 of them that are worth watching. Maybe not 3. Maybe skip 3. VHS. This is a now long-running anthology series with a tone that ranges to, maybe a little more over the top, but is still often quite gruesome. And there is a wide variety in the kinds of shorts that are in these films. VHS 2, probably the best of the series. But they do not need to be watched in order. You can watch whichever ones you want. Personally, I would recommend skipping VHS 85 and Viral. But just given the sheer variety in this series, I think this one's easy to get all the way through, because you probably won't be bored. Paranormal Activity. This has found footage, demons, some slow burn, that kind of thing. This is not my franchise. I do not like these movies. They have their defenders. There are, 6 of them or something like that, so there's clearly a demand enough to get more made. And even some of the later sequels have their defenders. You can watch the first one. It's short enough that if it doesn't catch your fancy, it's no huge loss. If you like the aesthetic of the first one, you will probably enjoy more. And then I'll throw Insidious, Conjuring, and Sinister together. They are not literally the same type of movie, but they are these sorts of same realm of kind of like demon, supernatural type of stuff that have solid first entries that have good merits, and sequels are iffy. And then last, I'll go just quickly mention a few more extreme series. I don't mean extreme. This is also not my area of interest, really, so I'm not going to say many details about these because I don't know that many specifics, but I'll just throw them out. Terrifier, active right now. The third one is, I think, out in theaters right now, even though I think it's set at like Christmas time, so it seems a little early, but whatever. Certainly infamous for its gore. Probably the grossest movies you can watch at a theater at this point. Then the Saw movies, the original being more thriller before the franchise starts to transition a little more into its more, trap-centered shock type of thing. Some people definitely get engaged in the more over-the-top style of story and all that. I think the sweet spot to hit this franchise at is probably around 2 or 3, where people still have a soft spot for these movies, and they haven't gone like way down the rabbit trail with all the story stuff that the rest of them do. But there are a lot of these, so, if you find you like them, I guess there's a lot to go through. Human Centipede, worth a mention, I guess. That's maybe the famous gross-out horror franchise on the list, I suppose. It kind of speaks for itself if you know the concept. I have not heard very many people defend the third one, but there are people who like the first 2. But these are the kinds of movies to watch if you want like a real endurance test. So for some final recommendations, I'll summarize it this way. If you want to like the whole series, your best bet is probably Scream. If you want the best individual movies, you could probably either go the Dead series or Alien. If you want the best monsters, go with the Godzilla series, although that is very extensive, that it contains a lot of movies. If you want the most fun, Leprechaun. And if you want the most creative series, Nightmare on Elm Street. If you have any more thoughts, any more franchises you would like to shout out, leave them in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.